would like to actually introduce Elcie Chen, and give you the floor to shout out and introduce yourself by yourself. Let's be authentic.
Yeah, thank you, Georgie. I guess first of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you, we see you loud and clear. Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks firstly for the invite to join this panel. So quick couple of sentences about myself. So you did pronounce the name and the company right. So I'm
Yes.
Elcie Chan. Yes, and the company I work for is Otsuka. So we are a global pharmaceutical company. I specifically work for the European head office team and focused on the digital health side of the business. But Otsuka, as a global pharmaceutical company, has a lot of experience and many, many years. Actually, we just celebrated our 100-year anniversary as a company, a global holdings company. And we've certainly been in the field of mental health for most of the time as a pharmaceutical company. So very much a topic close to our main core therapy areas. And from my side, very delighted to be able to talk about this in the context of digital therapeutics, because this is certainly a new wave of products and opportunities for helping patients with mental health disorders, as we know, which is increasingly something that is not only more widespread and more prevalent, but also more challenging to tackle as well. So a very, very timely topic for sure.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you for this. But again, let's keep things humanistic and very personal here, as it's a sensitive topic. So let's be more humans and more individuals than professionals. Why are you doing what you're doing? Before we jump into discussion, Otsuka, the anniversary and everything else, who are you and why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, no, definitely. And well, certainly, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't enjoy and didn't believe in what it is, right? And the value it can bring. So my personal background actually is as a researcher. So I spent most of my, education and training as a benchtop scientist, actually, looking at, genetics and looking at, how the human body works, how can we translate that into clinical medicine and support patient care. And so, at heart, I very much enjoy, understanding really, the science and the mechanics of, how all that works. In terms of, then how that fits right with what I'm doing right now, I mean, clearly the pharmaceutical industry is a key player, in delivery and supporting delivery of care, right, to patients. And it really has, it's in a good position to really support, both investment in this space, innovation, driving innovation in this space. All of these things is in a really, vital position. And I think it has a role, well, you could say a responsibility, to help drive a lot of this forward. So being in, this space, it is, certainly for me, the best marriage of where my personal interests are, and my background, but also being able to hopefully advance, healthcare delivery so that you're actually seeing some of these benefits translate to, patient outcomes. And let's face it, we're all patients in one way or another, in our lives, right? Hopefully maybe not mental health or other serious illnesses, but we are all patients. So we all benefit from, the advances of science. And so this is, at its heart, why I do what I do.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jimmy, welcome. We said, without asking you, hope you don't mind, we said we want to really keep it human and personal, this session, this fireside chat. So Elcie was actually sharing a little bit of insight, who is she and what's her driving force and so on. So now she being actually ready, why don't you jump on board? Tell us about yourself.
Thank you, and sorry about being late. So one of the fun facts about me is that I also lead one of Norway's largest podcasts as a host, and I was stuck in that, where the conversation drew a little bit further than it was supposed to. So, but luckily, as you said, then the timing was maybe perfect. Thank you first and foremost for hosting this and for wanting to join people as well from a little bit all over the world. That's the beauty of technology, so that we can actually share and talk to each other, crisscross and find engagement. So I am Jimmy Westerheim, then the founder of the Human Aspect Foundation, which is probably most known for creating the Life Experience Library, which is considered to be the world's largest free mental health tool. And of course, it's based on digitized lived experience. So it's basically more than 700 in-depth video interviews of people that have shared their personal story, including my own, basically of how they've had a mental health or physical or life challenge, how they managed to deal with that, live with that, or overcome it. And then, of course, what they have learned from it. So it's really lived experience, which is very common in psychology and has always been common. The typical, the former addict, which is talking to the other ones, or the person with lived experience as a next of kin talking to other people facing something. But a digitized version, a version that's open 24/7 and is following a format which is considered to be now a therapeutical tool. But then, of course, why I ended up making that is a very personal story that I'm also shared, which is I've had mental health in my entire life without knowing it was mental health. Typical for most of us, I assume. So I see that I've had people around me that were struggling with addiction. I've had people around me that were struggling with probably social anxiety, but also low self-esteem. We've had abuse in our family. So all of these things have gone around. So it's been chaotic when I grew up. My father wasn't there. And when I was 13 years old, it's been bullying, it's been all these things has been going on, and very typical for a lot of people when it's been going on for a long time and you're entering into a new stage of school. So I was entering into high school. I was so eager that this would change. I was like, now we're getting new people in my class, like now it will stop. And it didn't. So that's why I very quickly then drifted into just giving up. I was like, I can't do 3 more years of this, which is the schooling system in Norway, before you then can move away from where I was living at the time. So I basically ended up being extremely suicidal and planned my own suicide as well. And by chance survived within the week between what I was supposed to do. Then my grandmother, by accident in her case, basically asked me the right questions. So she asked me how I was doing with everything going on with my mother, that had just gotten sick, which was kind of the final drop, you could say, into all of this. And then very quickly, sports became my salvation in this case, because it was the one place where I was okay for me to be basically measured by my performances, and not who I was. Like I could put in an extra effort and I could be cherished for it. But I felt everything else in life, it wasn't up to me. I wasn't bullied because I was doing something wrong. I was bullied because of who I was, and I couldn't do anything about that. At least I felt so. I couldn't do anything about my family, my father, or all the things going on. So this basically changed my life, and then mental health became not something I was thinking about, and my life became much easier in that sense. Moved out early, got out into the world, was headhunted very quickly after I came from poor background, but by chance I was headhunted at the age of 21 after just 1 year in university and employed in a full-time job in shipping. So I got this kind of rocket career. And then at the age of 27, living the heights of my career at the time, I got this big accident in my back, a sporting accident. And I basically lost most of the ability to activate my nerves in my right leg. Then it's a big life crisis again. And that's where I realized that my identity was sports, even though I worked in shipping. And I also worked as a personal advisor for top-level athletes. So suddenly when I lost the ability to do sports and had to go in big recovery, I didn't know who I was. And again, I slipped very quickly into feeling that I wanted to give up on life. I was in Singapore without any family, similar to the COVID situation. And I have experienced then the two elements of going very into the dark slowly when I was 13 and very quickly when I was 27. And I realized that, wait a minute, like there's something with our society that makes me as a 27-year-old, in this case, successful young man, incapable of talking about struggles. I was emotionally extremely mature. Not necessarily emotions, but the vocabulary. Couldn't talk about it. Didn't know how to. I was ashamed. I was literally ashamed that I wanted to give up on life sitting in a fancy apartment in Singapore. I came from a poor background. I knew that I was lucky, which made it even more difficult for me to tell anybody that I was feeling like that, which we all know now today is very common. So that changed basically my life. I entered into Doctors Without Borders after that, 18 months recovery. And a very long story short, ended up with starting the human aspect after 2 years with Doctors Without Borders, because I wanted to build something that was in between psychologist and nothing. For me, that felt like this space was empty. I know today that there's plenty of things between a psychologist and nothing, but it didn't feel like it. So I wanted to make what is today the Life Experience Library, where people can learn from normal people, but in a professional way. And it can empower them or the next of kin, people supporting normal people, to move forward. And of course, what we really want to do with all of this is to redefine the way we all look at mental health. It is supposed to be part of life in the same way as health. I go to the gym or the forest or work out to take care of my health. I eat healthy because I want to take care of my health. But on mental health, this is seems to be very rare in any country. I've been fortunate enough to have been to close to 60 countries and lived in 10 of them. So I know it's not just in Scandinavia or Norway or Europe as well. It's fairly similar in most places. That's the short, long version of
Got it.
who I am.
Got it. Short, long sounds good. And yeah, speaking out of heart, I actually got the goosebumps a couple of times. So thank you for being so intimate and open. And to ensure that we really create a safe space that I would love to have here on this talk, a very brief intro also on my background and why am I here with these amazing people. My name is Georgi. I'm also dedicated to mental health, slightly less serious area, namely burnout. However, despite it comparatively being less serious, less severe than serious mental illness or maybe suicidal thoughts and so on, actually each area follows a lot of the similar trends. Each of the mental health spaces faces the question at some point, okay, but what's between nothing in the psychologist, or what's between me and going the long way towards a psychologist? And then we can also ponder a lot on, okay, I have already decided I may need help, but what happens next? And do I actually do it? How do I find out to do what's the right step? Who's the right person, and so on and so forth. And my personal why of working in the mental health area is basically myself being a typical millennial, heavily fear of missing out, FOMO driven, always living on the extremes and being highly risk kind of leaned towards burnout. So never really burned out, but I tend to lose my smile every now and then for a couple of months, and it feels quite bad for somebody that otherwise likes to smile. Elcie, I noticed that you've muted yourself. Given the format of being a fireside chat, I'm not really going to be passing the ball right back and forth. I would suggest that the three of us just, we've already laid the cards, the deck is on the table. I'd really love to just have an open discussion, the three of us, and just feel free to jump in, to correct, to object, and so on. But coming back to the broader topic, namely the global mental health crisis, because mental health on its own is kind of a very specific animal, if we could label it an animal, because at the end there is still no way of going to an x-ray, or like if you break your arm, you go to the x-ray, you know specifically what's went wrong and how to fix it. But for mental health, this is not the case. So we still have a lot of subjectivity to it, and there's so much to be told about it, but let's try to focus on the global mental health crisis as a framework, and maybe try to actually focus on also the applicable side. So what can we actually together do? Also, what areas do we need to depict and discuss in order to empower people and to drive change one step at a time? So yeah, both of you being obviously dedicated and devoted to the mental health area, would you agree that there is for real a mental health crisis going on, and what do you deem would be the factors that are resulting into this?
Absolutely. Yeah. Then, of course, I just wanted to follow up on what you're saying as well, because this is probably what makes mental health so challenging. Is, of course, stigma and all of these things in themselves, they are there. But what makes it challenging as well is that it's so undefined. It's the complete opposite of what we have been taught about physical health. You know, if you break your leg and you let it be, it will grow. It might grow crooked, it might grow the wrong way, but it will grow, right? Our body is fantastic in that sense. If you are struggling with depression or social anxiety or the conditions that are normally, you know, that can pass if you do something, so not the things that are chronic, they are just going to get worse. If you do nothing with depression, it's going to get worse. If you do nothing with social anxiety, it's going to get worse. Like, again, this is a generalization. But the point is, it goes against what we have been taught. And that's also something I think is essential for why we see all the symptoms we're doing right now. It's not just the stigma. It's not just that we don't want to be mentally ill, which is a massive factor as well. But it's also that we don't know this. We don't know that if we don't do anything, it's not going to disappear by itself in the same way as some physical conditions can do. Even bullying can disappear by itself if you just let it be for a while. But the consequences of bullying can take you for your entire life. You know, we've interviewed people who are, their biggest challenge in their 50s is low lack of self-esteem and inner criticism that almost drew them to losing their job, drew them to like very bad things within alcohol or addiction, because they were bullied in primary school, right? So they didn't do anything, let it be for 30 years, and they almost ruined their life 40 years later. So I think that's one of the key elements. And then, of course, I would argue as well, I'm not going to say all the things, but you can say some things as well. But another one that's very close to my heart is emotional vocabulary. Because one of the reasons why I didn't go to a psychologist or seek out help when I was 13 and 27, both of these very traumatic incidents in my life, was also that I didn't know what to say. If I had sit in front of the world's best psychologists, they might have digged it out, but it would have taken some time, because I could tell you what was going on objectively, but I couldn't have told you what was going on inside of me, and especially not the emotional elements of it. And I think that's a general element going all over the world. In some languages, we know there's not even words for it. But I would also argue that we aren't. It's so easy to think that Norway or the Nordics are so much better at talking about mental health, and especially the young generation. We're saying, oh, they're so much more open than we were. Yes, but not at a deep level, which is also why I think youngsters today are struggling much more than my generation was doing as well, because they're talking about it and they created this fake sense, not fake, but false sense of security, that we're much more open and understanding than we were, but we're not talking at it at a deeper level, and we don't take time to talk about the deeper conversations. That's something close to my heart, but there's so much more things. I guess you could share a couple of your things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what you just said about the deep emotional vocabulary, right? I think that is certainly something that we forget, you know, sometimes the emotion. We focus on things that are more tangible because they're easier to address, you know, when you can't put into words certain feelings and, you know, portray them. How do you begin to tackle that, right? So, you know, yeah, I completely agree. I think, just building on what Georgie said earlier, and actually yourself as well, Jimmy, that you take the comparison of physical health that you made. Mental health, like physical health, it's huge in terms of the spectrum of what's sitting underneath that. It's like the world, of disorders within, associated with the brain, right? And everything sitting under physical health could be anything from what you mentioned about, a knee injury, through to things like cancer and all sorts. There's a huge range, huge host of things sitting underneath that, so to try to even kind of clarify and understand that, it is already a challenge, let alone tackle it. The other piece, which I think is a challenge, is certainly, again, taking your sort of knee injury analogy and building on that one. With a knee injury, if you injure yourself and you need a knee replacement, things that you shouldn't do, right? You shouldn't go running the next day. There's certain things you shouldn't do to exacerbate it, and that applies also to lots of other physical injuries and challenges. But with mental health, lots of things are 100% beyond your control. It's the environment, it's the triggers that's coming from someone saying something, a certain look, something that you just randomly see in passing. All those things are triggers potentially, that you just can't avoid and you can't, do anything about. So I think that's one of the big challenges, and I think in mental health certainly, that it's you can't actually control for a lot of the factors that would exacerbate the problem, unlike what you could do for more physical conditions.
And on top of that as well, I kind of want to bring kind of what could happen when we put in information and we don't fully explain it. Diagnosis in mental health is starting to get fairly well known. It's being utilized in pop culture all over the place, but there's no explanation. So the diagnostic system was never meant for the general public. The diagnostic system is designed for a health system. It's not designed to describe what the patient is going through. It's described to say, okay, with this patient, we will try to do some research, so we will find some methods that might help in helping this patient. But every people working in mental health knows that you can't put everyone in this box and say depression. There's plenty of people around this box that also has depression that don't have the same symptoms, that wouldn't fall under the traditional diagnosis. And then when you throw this information out, social anxiety, all these things, especially then to the younger generation, but also with adults, we have a tendency to identify ourselves with something that was never meant for us. But if we have actually taught people what depression is and the spectrum of it, if we had taught people social anxiety and the spectrum of it, I have ADHD, if we had taught people about ADHD and the spectrum about it, people would have realized, number one, we are all living on the spectrum of depression, anxiety, and ADHD. I'm joking with that from time to time. But some of us are in the spectrum where it will then impact the quality of life that we're going through. And that is going to be independent, right? Let's say all three of us went through exactly the same. One of us developed social anxiety, one of us would develop depression, and the other one wouldn't develop anything, even though we went through exactly the same. Because as you said so perfectly as well, is that it's depending on what is your social network, is depending on what have you gone through before, is depending on what else are you going through right now, physical or mental, that is on top of this. So I think that's also important to take back the power of knowledge and make sure that we truly educate people on what mental health is, and not just leave them with some buzzwords that they think they can identify with in the loneliness that people are going through, because that's also a problem, I think, in the current world, making people think we are open and knowledgeable, even though we're not really.
Got it. And allowing myself to throw in a metaphor here, we usually, when riding the bicycle, we go into the direction where our sight is set on. And we obviously can speak for hours for all the challenges, all the difficulties, all the problems, but Going into a more practical perspective, how can we improve? So we've already mentioned, obviously, level of understanding, stigma, debunking stigma, speaking more. Is definitely a great start. But what else can we actually do apart from our conversation here today or tonight, depending on where you're tuning in from, in practical terms, given the current circumstances? Because at the end, what I hear from you both is that essentially, again, moving into a metaphor, that mental health is a little bit like epigenetics and the genome code. So you may or may not have certain predispositions, but it's all about your environment and the context of things that you're going through. So moving on a very practical level, how can we improve mental health?
That's a huge question. I mean, that's the question that we're all trying to find ways, in small ways, right? You know, to try and address, and you know, and it's clearly there is no one answer. At least I don't think there is only one specific answer to that. I think it's, you know, lots of things, lots of people doing lots of different things, you know, and continually doing that and growing that, you know, is going to be fundamental. I mean, if you just take, you know, what I'm working in and, you know, where Jimmy is working in, very different angles and aspects, but both still critical, right, to support the kind of support of patients with mental health. And I think, I mean, speaking from clearly the work that I'm working on, it's very much about treatments. You know, it's about kind of tools, digital tools to support patient care, and, you know, to provide actually a therapeutic treatment equivalent almost, you know, to what you might get otherwise in face-to-face therapy, or, you know, what you might expect even from taking a medicine. You know, it's that type of concept, right? We're looking at innovation delivered by digital that would actually, you know, create some of that incremental, you know, benefit on top of what currently is available today. And that's very kind of practical, you know, specific product, so to speak, yeah, of ways to address. But, you know, linked to that is all the stuff that we do around support and education, right? The conversations that we, you know, and the work and the collaboration we have with patient advocacy groups, you know, with healthcare organizations to try to help further the understanding of, you know, the specific space that we're in, and, you know, just try to grow that conversation and support education and awareness building. All of that, you know, is still fundamental work as well, right? I don't think any one piece of that is, you know, in and of itself going to necessarily make a dramatic change, but it's the collection, you know, the entirety, holistic view that will help push, you know, small improvements along the way.
And if we kind of analyze it with the ADHD goggles, so a very wide perspective, which is the beauty of having ADHD, what we see is the most hindering, as we say, for the biggest blocks of mental health. The biggest blocks of mental health is depression and anxiety. So again, two conditions that in theory can pass if you deal with them. The number one criteria to be able to overcome or live well with one of those, or any other milder mental health challenge, is early intervention. What is hindering early intervention? Stigma, low vocabulary, and lack of knowledge. So basically, if we're addressing those three in the sense of enriching then the entire society with a wider sense of knowledge, then in theory, more people will realize when something is off, and also realize that if I reach out now, and I'm not just talking to the health system, because very early intervention can just be to a friend. And even psychologists are saying, like, if I came in at this stage, you know, I would just act as a friend. I wouldn't use anything I learned in school, if you get the point. So it's more about being there for someone, feeling seen, heard, and getting some support in dealing with bullying, for example, as I went through, where things started for me. And then, of course, after that is the emotional vocabulary. We need to train. I'm a man, come from the countryside. There was no such thing. Like, it was just no space for me to talk about emotions. And I even grew up with very strong women. My biological father wasn't there. I had a fantastic grandmother, mother, aunt, people around me, women that expressed a little bit more emotions. And I heard it around me, but I wasn't part of the conversation in the same way as I should have been. So that's, of course, a gender element that needs to be addressed. Boys and men need to be allowed to have emotions. So when your kid starts to cry, instead of brushing them off and saying, oh, big boys don't cry, which I was told, they should be allowed to cry. They should also be asked, if it's not because of a physical challenge, they should be asked, why do you look sad? Why are you crying? I'm bullied at school. Oh, so how is that impacting you? Should be the question, instead of who is it, so I can go beat them up, right? You know, joking a little bit, because some members of my family was a little bit in that angle in the beginning. We were like, we'll deal with it, you know, but that's not normally how it's solved. So allowing someone to stand in challenges and grow resilience, but resilience with support, not resilience by independence. Because that's the world we have built now, where we are kind of cherishing people or managing to do things alone, which has never been the intention. Human beings need community, right? We need social support and identity and a group belonging. And that leads me kind of to the final element of it. Social exclusion is fascinatingly the root to most things. It's the root to polarization. It's the root to extremism of all kinds. So if you look into terrorism, if you look into racism, if you look into right-wing extremism, all of these elements, what you find in the research that goes through all of it is the same. It was people who felt that they were socially excluded or emotionally not present or emotionally not capable to make it in the society they were living. They were perfect prey for these energies and communities that drew them to making them feel the same. It's the same with the criminal research within the criminal environment. So if we deal with that, then in theory, people will be able to avoid things as crime, as addiction, as drugs, and the things that we all know is of course a part of this spectrum as well of mental health. We shouldn't forget that. That is a massive part of institutions, for example, is addiction, obviously. And then, of course, the final element of all of this is then, of course, social differences. We have created a world, particularly in Norway and the western part of the world, where social and socio-economic differences are massive. Massive, massive, massive. It's easy to say that Norway is the best country in the world, which in many measurements it could be, but in a lot of measurements it's not. Because if you're struggling here, you're literally nobody. And there's literally very little you can do in getting back up, like, because it's so visible that you're struggling, because it seems like everyone else is doing fine, but you're not. And then the road to psychological trauma is big. So on a more political element, I would draw it all the way from socio-economic differences, all the way back to that we need to educate our children and being more emotionally aware as parents, because our generation now is the parents, right? To the coming generation, it's our responsibility to not pass the same lack of insight and minor traumas that our parents passed on to us from their grandparents. And we kind of need to decide that it needs to stop here. We can't create a new generation of people that will struggle for the next 50 years just because we didn't have time to talk to them about the bigger things in life.
Absolutely. So many themes going in parallel there. Yeah, I'm having even hard time to actually pick one of the directions mentioned. But one thing is certain. I mean, us being gathered now in the context also in a technological take of things, that's, I guess, also perspective that would be relevant, and maybe Elcie could actually help us there. How does the technological provider, or in this specific case Otsuka, actually interact, or what's the focus in specific in the mental health area? How's the vision for next steps there?
Well, so it's across a range of areas that we work in, and obviously, really there's the pharmaceutical side of things, but speaking for the digital health side, we are looking at lots of different digital solutions that could just support better patient care, right? Whether it's what I mentioned before, a digital therapeutic, so the equivalent of taking, a medicine, you now actually do a task on, an app on a smartphone, and that's your equivalent because it's, triggering some mechanism within the brain that actually helps them, achieve certain outcomes, right? And that's the type of thing that's been testing in studies. So from that, treatment side all the way through to general support. So providing tools for patients, right, to support education and awareness, through to actually even in early drug discovery and in early sort of R&D and analytics, of data, so that you can better inform, how do we do things like, select the right products, to do research on? How do we actually, look at, so, we know like digital biomarkers, right, is also quite a big topic, right? How do we, get better at more personalized medicine, finding ways in which we can, target things that are unique to an individual rather than broad spectrum, try to one size fits all, So across the spectrum, we're looking at, the ways in which digital can help, with supporting patients in that regard. And then, as I said before, aside from the specific products or tools, then it's just generally the activities that we've always done, as a company working in the space is really about, all of those educational events, supporting patient advocacy groups, connecting, patients and doctors and health systems to help push, policy, to help push, reimbursement and funding. All of that, remains a key focus, certainly.
And for me as well, it's all about having two thoughts in our minds at the same time, which is challenging for human beings. We all are aware of that, speaking of psychology. So what is the most important thing in mental health to be able to move forward? Is we already spoke about it. It's human-to-human interaction, it's social interaction. But that doesn't mean that technology is not part of it. But it also means that technology will never replace it. So I think it's very important for us to say that and look at technology in a way where it will supplement human beings in the same way as it's, made us to the species that have gotten to where we are. We have always found ways to supplement our insufficiencies. We are not even close to being the most physical or mental, for that matter, strongest species on the planet. And especially if you draw it further back in history. But the one thing that we have seemed to find that kind of made us the surviving species of all of this is we found tools. We found ways to utilize to kind of cover that. Oh, we don't have fur anymore. Okay, let's make coats. Like we can't reach up there. Okay, let's make a ladder. It's like we've always had something in us that had driven us to evolve and cover the gaps. So there's a very important fact in this picture, which is we do not have enough professionals to make the professionals cover the need. And we're not intended to either, because if we did, we would subconsciously then confirm that it's only professionals that can support people that are struggling in life, which is not true. But then on one hand, we need to make the professionals more efficient. Here, technology is massive. And on the other side, we need to be able to make preventive measures and low threshold measures bigger and reach wider with technology. Because again, we can't have on this side having peers running around the country on a tour bus and just like popping off at every corner of the world and being peer support groups, right? Because that's one of the things, if we were to be honest, that's one of the things that would truly help if we did that on all aspects within mental health. But we can't do that physically because there's not enough people. And then on the other side, we can't just send professionals around on the same tour bus, right, around the country, like the distances to travel here or from crisscross borders either. So COVID showed us, thankfully, it kind of took us 50 years ahead almost, or at least 20, 30 years ahead, when it came to understanding that in a therapy run, we could say that anywhere between 40 and 60 or 70% could be digital. And in theory, it would have no impact on the outcome. But that's only if you had 20 to 40% physical in the beginning. Because we know that 100% digital therapy versus 100% physical therapy, this is less effective. But what we have also found is the combination of the two, as long as the relationship is established before we move into more digital elements, the result is the same. And then we also know on, for example, then different elements and different challenges and different diagnoses, digital therapy is the only thing that will reach them, right? Because there's a lot of people who won't be able to, either physically or mentally, come to a mental health office or a psychologist's office. So this is how we can improve over here, like you already spoken. And we're mile years ahead now, sadly, thanks to COVID, you could say. So this will evolve, and this is not the future, this is the present. Now the technology is there, people have overcome these barriers, even the elder generation of the therapists and psychotherapists have realized that we need to be digital as well. And that kind of moves me to the other side. Clearly, the human aspect has made peer support digital. That's basically what we do. But we're not the only one who has done that. Even the more traditional peer support organizations around the world has done the same as the professionals. They have gone digital. Not every time, but as I said, maybe the meeting number 1, 2, and 3 could be physical. And then it could be digital, even it could be a combination. Maybe 5 of the participants is sitting in the room and 5 of the other participants is even from other countries, as long as they speak the same language. And suddenly you have the beautiful synergy of technology and human beings that can create a positive impact that we didn't have before through technology. And this will only evolve because, of course, if you then go VR, AR, all of these things, in theory, the impact will be bigger because it will be more human, which is then the fun fact of the whole thing. Because the human experience is, of course, feeling that we are together in that room. And we know that you can manipulate the mind in a way where it doesn't really know the difference between reality and what is not. That's, for me, philosophically, I think it's a little bit sad but true. But the point is, within professional athletes, the field that I came from, we know that downhill skiers that has never been in that hill ever in their life physically have done simulations and trained in simulators, and they have actually won gold medals the first time they ever ran down that hill, which in theory sounds physically impossible, but it's not, because your brain has already done it many times, and your brain doesn't know the difference between physically doing it and then digitally doing it, if it's a good simulation. But being a little bit more philosophical about it, at least this is what I personally feel, energy is part of the universe. Energy is part of healing, and I'm not talking about something wishy-washy here. I'm talking about just the warmth of a human being cannot, at this point, be transferred by technology fully. So there is still important elements to keep hold on, saying that we're not going to go all the way into this Steven Spielberg, Elon Musk future here, because that will be a massive mistake, if you ask me, within mental health. But then again, seeing it as a massive supplement is very interesting. And within research, it's obvious how technology can help, because you can basically analyze data sets in the matter of a day that you would have used 10 years to do with human beings. So in terms of research, again, technology will take us faster in a way where we have probably never seen. That will hopefully then improve both methods, our insight, and then of course the way we go about different things. So I think that was kind of what I would argue to be the importance of technology, and it is essential, clearly, in the way that we're living, but also maybe looking at social technology, and instead of saying it's dangerous, because again, research shows that social media is an accelerator. It is not the cause for a lot of mental health challenges, self-image challenges, and identity challenges, and bullying and these things. It is an accelerator. It just makes what we had before social media as well so much more present in our life. I have always said that if I was bullied today in the same way when I was 13, I probably would have not been alive, because I could go into my home, I could close the door, and the bullies were not there. Today, I will do the same, and the bullies are here, right? So you cannot hide. That is a fact that also makes it very important to say that youngsters today, they are not living in an easier or more difficult reality than we did, which is very easy for us to say. especially if you look at the socioeconomic elements. Most countries would be able to argue that, your kids, you don't know what you're going through. It was much worse for us, and you have all these horrible stories. But the point is it has never been worse or better in history. That's my argument. It's only been different. So the challenge that the youth is going through today are challenges that we know very little about and our parents know nothing about. And that is why it is challenging, in the same way as it is challenging for someone who experiences war for the first time. It isn't necessarily war and being a refugee in itself that is overwhelming challenging, because human beings have dealt with that forever in history, fairly well as well. But for the first time, that's when it's extra challenging. And especially if you're alone in it, if your elder generation don't know how this is, and they're going through it at the same time for the first time. And this we have also seen in research with parents who went through First or the Second World War, that went through another trauma. Their children were struggling less than themselves, because their parents had gone through it before. So their parents was suddenly able to support the children who was going through it the first time much better than the other ones. So that's why I think it's important to put that point in place, that we need to be aware that the current new generation, they're not weak. They are just going through something that is brand new. And we have probably done what is in Norway is called a bear favor. Basically, we have made life so protected for a lot of them that the resilience we spoke about earlier has maybe not been practiced as much as our generation. And if we don't put knowledge on top here now, I think the younger generation will struggle with mental health to levels we have never seen before. So if we don't equip with them with proper tools to deal with what is coming, we will have a mental health crisis, not just a mental health challenge.
And on top of this, we actually have one more complication layer, or at least that would be my claim, namely making a parallel with, for example, the ongoing trend for burnout within the corporate environment. And McKinsey actually came out with an interesting paper a couple of months ago, basically stating that it's nearly impossible, if not completely impossible, to really cater and empower, improve the circumstances, the situation for somebody, if the management or the decision maker is themselves or are themselves actually also struggling right now. And then this would be the layer, the additional flavor that I'm throwing on top of what you just said, that while on the one hand, youngsters may be struggling with complete different set of challenges that we are only limitedly prepared to handle and address as ourselves, also in the role of a parent or in the role of the elderly, being challenged due to everything ongoing, then I guess the so-called mental health crisis is actually getting even more amplified, because at the end, everybody, all the different stakeholders are struggling somehow on their own, and nobody's really capable of taking an informed decision or doing the needed steps.
We need to learn from the Eastern, or again, as a generalization, but we, at least the Western world needs to learn either from the countryside in the Western world, because it's the same there, or we need to learn from, for example, the African continent, the Southeast Asian continent, or the Central Asian continent, where I have lived myself, or South American continent, where community is much stronger. We have designed an individualistic world where we throw our grandparents into a home, where basically grandparents and parents are working, both of them are working, which is great for equality, but it's not that great for support, emotional support, especially, as you say, if everyone wants to have a super career as well, which means they work 12 to 14 hours or 10 hours, or, they're not there as much for their kids. And maybe they have to move because of their career, so maybe their grandparents are living 2 hours away. And these are also very normal circumstances in the Western world. And this is something where progress has not been positive, if you ask me. This is where we need to look into ourselves and see, what are we supposed to do about that? Because if we carry on in the angle we're doing right now, everyone will be isolated eventually. and then everyone will just feel like the only thing that they can do is trust themselves. Just of course, a lot of the burnouts is leading to that as well. As you're saying, the boss maybe are stressed. They feel they can't talk to anyone because their social network isn't really open for that. The employees themselves are struggling with things. They're not talking to each other because they're all dealing with their own challenges. And it isn't a natural community. Companies we work very closely with companies, and a lot of them believe that if you do Friday beers, you have solved it. Or if you give people a free membership at the gym.
Yeah.
Both of those things, I'm not saying both of those things are necessarily negative. They can be, that depends. But that's not the solution. The solution is to take mental health seriously and work with prevention and start being, working towards psychological safety in the sense of creating more openness and then again more knowledge in the workplace and having active, for example, peer supports elements and mental health elements. And now I'm not talking for conditions and diagnosis, but for stress, for young leaders, for people with extra pressure for deadlines, creating again healthy systems within the company where these challenges can be addressed at a low threshold level in an early intervention. If you do that, in theory, these challenges will go down to a minimum. They will probably never disappear because that's not the point, but it will go to a level where most of us will deal well with it. Human beings are massively resilient if we are allowed to actually go through something with a little bit of support. Then normally we come through it.
Thank you, Jimmy. And Elcie, Jimmy and myself, we've been speaking so much. I really didn't want to interrupt him because touching so many layers and also pushing certain emotional buttons on my end at least as well. But yeah, if we slowly go towards rounding off the discussion, and Elcie, please be first. Is there anything that you would like to share with the audience from your personal and authentic standpoint of view?
With regards to how to move the mental health?
Just about anything. Please speak out of your heart, whatever it's there right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you just said, right? Hearing Jimmy speak about, obviously his personal experience and also the perspectives coming at it very much from a very human, angle. It's just very moving and very resonates, so much that to your point, you goosebumps for sure. And it's that type of realism and human touch that, sometimes, we can't get enough of, I think. We do, or in the industry I'm in the work that I do, you get caught up, right? We talk about burnout, talk about, you get caught up in the daily grind, the target to deliver, the next, report you have to create, presentation, etc. You get just caught up in the tasks. You forget the human element sometimes and the emotion around it. And it is, really critical that actually we take the time out to reflect, on that and to have those, human conversations. And I think that's, certainly one takeaway from hearing Jimmy is that I think but I certainly would like to do more of that, just with my teams on a more regular basis to be proactive, in injecting that as opposed to reacting to what the company or what the environment might otherwise provide me. So that's been a great insight and takeaway from my side. And certainly I think there is a lot of good things though still that's happening in this space. There's a lot of opportunity to do more, certainly, but there is a lot of really good things that are happening, and we can probably never do enough. That's the other way to think about it as well. It's always constant, improvement, right? We're always seeking to kind of do better. But at the same time, I don't want to end the conversation, on simply, the challenges. I think that we should also recognize that there has been some great, innovation, and there's been, certainly great initiatives. The human aspect, Jimmy's own initiative is a great example of that, right? But there's lots of other examples, and all of these things just makes it, for me, a very promising outlook as well for the future that we can all work towards supporting.
I think as well, from my side, it's essential for us to start looking at, instead of looking at gender as something locked, looking at the energy of things. You know, looking at masculine and feminine energy as a yin and yang, like in the Eastern traditions, where they've looked upon it in this way for, you know, long before. And looking more at that we're all born with different levels of energy when it comes to then a masculine and a feminine energy. I am then defined as someone and was bullied for being someone who potentially then had more feminine energy than what my masculine world was accepting at the time. But of course, in a world as well where we're pushing equality and women so much into attributes that are normally lean towards the masculine, I think that is a little bit dangerous, and that we should also cherish the nurturing side of the feminine energy in both men, women, or hen, is making sure that we are all balanced, because the key to mental health is a combination. The practical masculine energy, if you were to call it that, where you're solution oriented, you try maybe new things, you're a little bit more risk taking in the sense of jumping into, for example, therapy. And then the nurturing side of both taking care of yourself, listening to yourself, expressing yourself, but also listening and caring for others. You know, if it is one thing I hope people are left with, it is to just be a little bit more aware of what is going around you, like with colleagues, with people. Just look up and give a little bit of time when you ask people how people are doing. Don't ask, you know, are you doing okay or are you doing good? Ask, how are you? And stand still. Show with your body language that you're actually waiting for an answer, that you're not just running off to something. Because I think it's the small things that will make the biggest differences. We could talk about technology and this and that and medicine or human aspect, but in the end of the day, it's the people you have around you that impacts you the most, to be fair.
Thank you. It feels I really cannot add anything more than what's already said. And at least for me, it has been highly engaging, highly interesting, a lot of goosebumps along the way. I would love to preserve and claim the call to summon you once again. It seems the topics we've touched base are highly relevant and even more timely. And personally, I think one can never speak enough about all the various bits and pieces and aspects that we just scratched on the surface. So thank you both for taking the time, for making space for the conversation, and also being as open, as authentic as you were. Has been touching. Thank you for this. I'm actually very much looking forward already from now to the next opportunity of us three, and potentially involving additional individuals as well, for creating the safe space and speaking, as the Germans say, clear text. So speaking about things as they are, naming things with the correct vocabulary, and showing people that not being okay is actually okay. It's vulnerability is not something to be ashamed of. And the only way of creating meaningful impact is at the end being authentic and showing we ourselves are also just humans. So thank you for being here and being so open.
Thank you.
Awesome. So with this, I'm closing the mental health panel. Jeff, Elcie, thank you. You can stick around if you want to.